Greetings radio people, welcome back to my shack. Following the last TS-890 video that I did, I've had quite a few people asking if I could show some more detail on various bits and bobs and aspects of the radio. So today I'm going to throw together a very quick video to talk about digital modes and how we configure the TS-890 to support AFSK and FSK modes. Now, I'll focus on FT8 because that's all the rage, and every piece of activity on every band seems to be on FT8 at the moment. But I'll try and make it as generic as possible so that I can show you how well thought out the radio is and how well it supports lots of different configurations and different setups. So, TS-890, digital modes, let's get on with it. So the first thing I want to talk about is how I've got the radio configured. You'll see I'm tuned to 7074, which is the FT8 frequency on 40 meters. I've got the band scope set up in center mode, so my transmit dial frequency is in the middle, and I've got the span set to plus 2.5, plus minus 2.5 kcs. So we can see pretty much all of the FT8 activity. If I put it to plus minus 5, that's 5 kcs either side. But it's set up so that you can see pretty much all of the FT8 activity on the band. And interestingly, one of the things we're going to talk about is time synchronization. And you can see very clearly when 99% of the transmissions end, that there are a few, 1, 2, 3, 4, that end too late, and there are also a few that start too early. These are clearly people who haven't got their PC clock set up correctly, but we'll talk about it in a minute. So the first thing to understand about the TS-890 is that it's got a lot of options available to how you source audio for your transmissions. Traditionally, you'd clearly put your audio through a mic socket, and in normal SSB activities, that's the way you'd work it. But when we were running an AFSK mode, like FT8 or PSK, your audio is coming from the PC, so the rig needs to know where to source the audio from. And there are quite a few options on this radio for that, and we'll try and show that to you now. The other concept you need to get your head around is the concept of data and non-data modes. Currently the radio is in USB, you will see, so that's a traditional upper sideband using the microphone. That's how we're set up. I've got the bandwidth set very wide, and I've got the high cut, low cut set wide so that I can receive a very wide bandwidth. But other than that, the rig is in a normal upper sideband. If I press the data button, which is below the mode selections on the right, then the radio goes into the data version of USB. So I'm still in USB, but I'm in a data mode. Now that's basically just a different configuration for the rig, so you can have different settings and be able to switch between them by switching on data and off data. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to focus on USB because that's the way that I run my digital modes. As I explained in a previous video, I'm very keen on macros, so I have a lot of macros configured to set up my rig how I want it for lots of different modes. So I've got a single click in my logging software that sets up the bandwidth, the high cut, the low cut, the filters, all of the other things, the scope settings. All of that happens with a single click from my logging software when I want to go into WSJT modes, for example. But what we're going to do is we're going to tell the radio how to source the audio, and to do that you press and hold the data key, which is also labelled mod cell, which stands for modulation select. So when you press and hold that button, you now get this screen up in front of you. And there's two things we need to understand here. One is the TX method. So send PTT, that means when you PTT or put the radio into transmit from the mic socket, it's saying where is the audio going to come from. So in this case it's configured when the TX starts from the PTT in the mic socket. The front is configured where the mic socket is switched on and the rear connections are switched off. So if I PTT my radio using my microphone through the mic socket, the only source of audio is going to be the microphone itself. Data send, so if I use the data send line through the accessory socket or through the USB connection or maybe via cat control, then my front socket, my mic socket, is switched off and my rear socket is enabled. So if the radio goes into PTT using cat control or using the accessory socket or via the USB connection that we're going to talk about, then the audio is going to be sourced from the USB. Now, As with all configurations on this radio, you use the multi-channel select switch, and you'll see that there are a number of options. So we can either source the audio from the accessory connector. So, for example, if you had an external interface like a microKEA, that would be sending audio to your rig through the accessory socket. We're going to use just a USB cable between the rig and the PC, so we're going to select USB audio, but you'll also note that you can select LAN, so that's your local area network. So if you've got a network cable connected to your rig, you can configure remote computers to send audio to the radio over your home network, but we're not going to cover that. So we're going to stick with USB audio, and that's for the data mode off configuration. So that will be in normal USB mode. Now, if we quickly put the radio back into data mode, which you can see by USB-D, and then we press mod select, this is a separate configuration. So you'll see up here it says data mode on. So what we can do is set up different audio sources depending whether the radio is in data mode or in normal mode. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to just deal with USB normal, and we're going to say that the audio is sourced from the USB system. So that's the first thing we need to set up. So item 2 that we need to think about is communication speeds between the computer and the PC. So if we go to menu and we go to number 7, which is rear connectors, we're interested in this case in items 1 and 2. Now, the back of this Kenwood TS-890 has got a traditional 9-pin serial connector. The baud rate, or the communication rate between the computer and the radio using that 9-pin connector is configured by menu 7 item 0. In my case it's set to 57.6, but we're not interested in that. We're purely going to use a single USB cable to control audio and PTT and comms between the rig and the PC. So we're interested in items number 1 and item number 2. So when you install the device driver for this radio and you connect the USB cable, I'll show you in a minute when we get onto the PC setup, but you will have 2 COM ports installed, and they're called virtual COM ports because they don't physically exist. They're inside the radio as a piece of hardware, effectively connected to a USB hub along with a sound card and various other things. But we've got a standard COM port and we've got an enhanced COM port, and for the sake of this exercise we're going to set both of those to be 115/200 bps, so that's bits per second, or your baud rate. So just set yours the same as mine, and we'll come on when we get to the PC side of configuration, we'll understand why. So the third thing we need to worry about is configuring RTS and DTR lines. Now, it all sounds a bit complicated, doesn't it? But basically, in the early days of RS-232 communication, a serial port, which is the 9-pin traditional type, or at one point it used to be a 25-pin connector, that includes 2 lines which we originally used for hardware handshaking. RTS stands for ready to send, and DTR, I think, stands for data transmit ready, although I might be wrong. But it used to be used for the handshaking, but these days that's not used very much, and in the amateur radio world we use them for various other things. So we can use the RTS and the DTR line. They're basically lines that can either be high or low, and we're basically going to use them either to control PTT, so transmit or receive. We're going to have CW keying, so either key down or key up, and we're going to have RTTY control for FSK, so either mark or space. Now, if we go to press the menu button, and then we press the advanced menu button, we can see that options number 17, 18, 19 and 20 all cover the virtual standard and virtual enhanced COM port configuration. You've got configuration for RTS and DTR on both of these COM ports. For the purposes of this exercise and for the generic setup that we're interested in for AFSK modes, we're going to select the RTS for the standard COM port, and we're going to set that to PTT. So that means when that line goes high, digital 1, the radio will go into PTT and into transmit, and when it's low it will go into receive. So we want to configure that, and then the other 3, for the purposes of this exercise, we're going to set to off. However, if you were using something like Ham Radio Deluxe and you wanted to use the CW keyboard, you might use your enhanced port, and I'm using the multi-channel select tool. You might want to use your enhanced port RTS for CW keying, for example, so you'd set it up like that. And you might want to use your DTR line for RTTY keying, in which case you'd set it up like that. I'm not going to show you Ham Radio Deluxe in this video, but that gives you some clues as to how you configure the radio to support RTS and DTR configuration for different things, so for CW or for RTTY keying. But for the purposes of this exercise, the only thing I want you to do is set item number 17 RTS so that it says PTT. And then last but by no means least, we want to configure audio levels. So we'll just have a quick check at that. So we're going to go menu, we're going to go item 7, rear connectors, and we're going to have a look at items 6 and items 8. So item 6 is the USB audio input level. Think of this as a digital volume control, which goes from 0 to 100. In my case, the USB audio input level I've got set very, very low. And we'll come on to that later, but I've found this is the correct setting for me. Those of you playing along at home may have different mileage and you may need a different value there, but try my value to start with. So that's saying when the audio is being sent from the PC to the radio for transmit, we've got a volume control there, and we've got that very low. We've got that down at 3. Item 8 is the USB audio output level, and in this case I've got mine set to 50, which is 50% or half, and that's the volume of the audio coming from the radio back to the PC for the PC to decode the signals. So set yours up the same as mine, and let's see how we get on. Okay, so I've now switched over to the PC. You can hopefully see my blank screen. The first thing I want to talk about is the comport. So before you do anything, make sure that you install the driver from Kenwood before you connect the cable up to the radio. So install the driver on the PC first, and then connect a standard USB cable from the USB port to a USB connector on the back of the radio. And then a number of devices should install. There should be an audio device and 2 comports. Now, my PC is pretty complicated. I've got a lot of radios connected. I've got some microKEA stuff, so the number of comports and everything that you see when I show you this stuff might be a bit daunting, but your mileage should be very, very different if you're playing along at home. It should be very much simpler. I want to show you something though first before we go any further. Some people get in a bit of a muddle with comports, and the reason that can happen is that when you connect a USB device to your PC, it remembers the device, and it remembers the port that it was connected to. So if you've had a number of radios in the past and they've all been connected to your PC, the same PC, those devices will still exist on your computer, but it will hide them from you unless they're actually connected. So what you might find is when you connect up your shiny new TS-890, your Windows application decides to assign comports 20 and 21, and you think, well, what on earth is comport 1 to 19? And the answer is that they've been used in the past and that they're hidden. This command set here that you can see, hopefully you can see that, it says set dev manager show non-present devices equals 1, and then devmgmt.msc. This is a bat file. I've created this as like a text file, but saved it as device mangler in my case, just because I'm a bit stupid, device mangler.bat. And that executes this command before it opens Device Manager. And what that does, you double click on it and Device Manager opens up. And then if you say View Show Hidden Devices, then you'll find if you open your port setting, you may find that you've got a whole bunch of things in here that are kind of greyed out. And that's because they're devices that have existed on your system in the past that don't exist anymore. I've got some examples in the sound here. So for example, that USB audio codec, that's been connected at some point in the past but isn't connected to the system anymore, but it's taking up resources because it's still sat there. But in the case of the ports, that will be why you sometimes find that your port numbers aren't what you expect them to be. But anyway, for the case of the TS-890, mine is, as I've installed the driver, I've connected my USB cable, and 2 devices have installed. One is 17 and one is 18. Now it's quite difficult to know which is the standard and which is the enhanced port. And if you double click on the device and it opens up the device, and if you go to details, and in here if you select location information, which is somewhere along here, location information, if that port number is 1, it's the standard port. If that port number is 2, it's the enhanced port. That's the only way I've figured out of working out which is which. But it doesn't really matter so much. So when we've installed our we've connected up the radio for the first time. It's installed the 2 ports. Hopefully yours are called 2 and 3 or 4 and 5 or something sensible like that. You should also have an audio device. Now, in my audio devices, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different USB devices in here. If you go into Device Manager and open up, or rather in Control Panel, and open up the sound options, you should see something like this. Now, you'll see that I've got, within the playback tab, I've got something called TS-890 USB Audio 2 Radio. And I've renamed that. If you double click it, you can edit this text in here. And I've renamed that so that it's called something sensible, so that when I'm looking in an application on the PC, I know which is which. I've done it because I've got so many. But primarily, it's always a good idea to give these names so that you know what they are. You also need to check the levels for these devices. So audio to radio, so that's from the computer to the radio, so that's the transmit audio. My setting is up at 100%. You may decide that you want to put it a bit lower than that. If you remember, we've got the audio input volume control on the rig right down at 3, so that's because I've got this up so high. So you could turn this one down and that one up a bit, whatever you feel like. And then in the recording tab, you've got USB audio from radio, so that's the receive audio, so that's coming from the rig to the PC. Again, I've renamed it and given it a sensible name, and I've set the level. Again, on this one is set to 100. So that should be all we need to worry about. So we should have an audio device, which will be called USB audio codec for the TS-890. And we'll have 2 COM ports. One is, in my case, 17 and the other is 18. My standard port is COM17. You may notice, those of you playing along at home, that I'm running Windows 7. I've decided against upgrading to Windows 8, but the config should be pretty similar. I do have a laptop with Windows 10 on, so if anybody's really stuck with configuring Windows 10, give me a shout, put something in the comments, and I'll try and help you out. So what we're going to do now is run WSJT version 2, of course, the latest and greatest, and I've configured this so that it's going to run as if I ran it for the first time ever. So the audio is, the software is just starting. It's popped up the warning which is telling me about the new protocols, so we'll click OK to that. And then what we'll do, we'll bring this over here. So that's the main window, and then this is the Spectrum Scope window. So if I go File, Settings, first thing I've got to do is put my call sign in, which I think I know, and that's my grid. Now then, let's go to radio. Now then, everybody, you won't find the Kenwood TS-890 listed in here, and everybody says to me, well, why when I select TS-990 does it not work? And that's because the 990's got 2 receivers, so every command the PC has to send to the rig has to tell it whether to apply it to the main or to the sub receiver. So the best one to choose for the purposes of the 890 would be the 480, because it's exactly the same command set as the 890. So let's use the TS-480. Now the serial port that you're going to select is going to be your standard port. So in my case that's COM17. If you remember when we set up the baud rates in the computer, we set it to 115200. So we need to copy that. Now, default for all of these things should work fine, but if you're playing along at home and you're interested, it should be 8 bits, 1 stop bit, and no parity. We don't need to worry about forcing control lines, and then we need to think about PTT method. Now, we can either use RTS on COM17, because if you remember, we set that up. Now, some software may not give you the option to use cat control, which is basically a PC command to tell a radio to go into transmit. So you may need to use RTS, but we've already configured the rig to accept that. Or we could use cat, and that's the simplest way of all. The audio source is going to be the rear connector, the USB connector. I'm going to run in upper sideband, and I'm going to let the rig do my split operation. So if we now hit test cat, that immediately goes green to tell me the comms are right. I'm going to hit test PTT, and I'm going to listen, and I can hear that my rig has gone into PTT, no problem. So that's all working beautifully. So now we go to the audio tab, and what we need to do now is find the audio devices that I renamed. So in my case, it's TS-890 USB audio from radio and TS-890 USB audio to radio. Simple as that. So for the purposes of this, that's all we're going to worry about. All the other config you can think about and worry about yourself. The other thing we want to worry about is how many bins per pixel we've got up here and what the start frequency is. Generally, the very, very low part of the audio won't work too well, 0 to 100 or 200 hertz, so I tend to bump that up to something like that. Bins per pixel I'm going to change so that we've got probably up to about 3 kilohertz bandwidth across here. So this is about 3000 hertz here. And then I'm going to turn the averaging down so that it speeds the graph up. And the other thing I'm going to do is change my palette to be banana, because I happen to like banana. Now, 40 meters, back over here, you'll see the Breg has tuned itself to 7078. That's one of the 40 meter frequencies, the one we were interested in. Okay, the reason it's not there is because the mode is JT9. Sorry, we need to go mode, FT8, and we need to go 40 meters, 7074. The rig is tuned to 7074. All the decoding has started up here. And when we get to the end of this transmission period, you'll see that it'll decode perfectly over here. Let's wait for the next one, because I didn't catch all of that one. The other thing I tend to do is put this into current rather than cumulative. But when this 30-second period is over, you'll see that my decoding is working perfectly. So the only other thing that I need to mention with regard to FT8 and WSJT modes is that they're time critical. So I'm running a piece of software called Dimension 4, which does time synchronization of the PC clock. It's a piece of software that you can download. If you just Google Dimension 4, install it, configure it, it's very simple to set up, but it just runs as a service. And once it's set up, it just keeps your PC clock accurate, so that your 30-second transmit and receive periods are synchronized with the rest of the world. That's very, very important. One of the tricks of weak signal modes is knowing what to look for at what portion of time. So if your time's out, it just doesn't work. So Dimension 4, there are other versions of different options available, but I use Dimension 4. I find it works very, very well. The only other thing I'd encourage you to do is find a bit of blank spectrum, right click and do set your transmit frequency somewhere, so you're not going to bug everybody. Hit the tune button, and then what you need to do is alter your audio levels. So your audio transmit level, which you can control here, or you can use the mixer that we showed you earlier. So you can use the audio device here, so the audio to radio, so you could use this level control here for your adjustment. The thing to do is just hit the tune button and adjust your rig so that you've got no ALC showing. Set your output power to about 20-25 watts, something like that, and make sure that you haven't got any ALC showing there. The other thing to do is to fiddle with the recording level, so the audio from radio level, so that this is around, I think they recommend something like 30 dB with no signals present, which in this day and age on FT8 is quite tricky. But hopefully that covers how to get this up and running on the TS-890 up and running with WSJT-X. As you know, I'm a big fan of meteor scatter, so I use this kind of configuration on 6 meters and 4 meters, and the mode that I tend to use then is MSK144, or some of the other modes that are more suited to meteor scatter. But that's hopefully giving you some clues as to how to set things up for FT8. I hope this has been useful.